I was been following Twitter this whole time because Twitter has been, it's been extremely funny, the fallout from the budget and all that shit that's been happening. Um, since the budget was released and since we've had all of these issues with regards to what's going on with Liz Truss and how crazy it is that she ever got into the position that she's in right now. How on earth does someone this incompetent get into a position of power? And what we've seen, I've seen multiple tweets at this point coming from people saying this Liz Truss is like Jeremy Corbyn, right? There was a John Rentoul column in The Independent when he was like, Trussonomics is like Corbynomics because they both involve some amount of borrowing. Not less because Liz Truss is just borrowing money to just throw at energy companies to give them more money and to pad out their shareholders because she doesn't want to tax them. And Jeremy Corbyn's was using that money for public works projects or to bring things under government control so they could be revenue generating. So this is completely, like, no way similar whatsoever, right? And then, and yeah, again, so that's just like completely nonsensical as a position to try and say that they're economic programs just because they involve like some amount of government borrowing. It means that these particular economic programs are in any way similar, like whatsoever, right? It just happens to be they again the media class somehow perceive anything outside of their narrow window of what is acceptable within the neoliberal consensus as being radical and therefore the same. It's the same people who'll tell you that there's the rise of populism, despite the fact that left populism is just, at this point, social democracy. Like, it's no more than social democracy at this point, really. And right populism is fascism, right? And they deliberately equivocate between these things to try and make you think that lukewarm social democracy is somehow equivalent to the opposite of fascism when it really fucking isn't. Nobody's trying to seize the means of production in the UK. That's not happening. No one's advocating for that happening. They're just advocating for a fair economic system that involves some amount of government intervention, which is basically being extracted from any of the kind of public understanding of how economic policy is supposed to happen, right? We saw in the question time that we just watched Bridget Phillipson essentially saying that, oh, we've got a really good plan because we're going to borrow some money to be able to spend on breakfast clubs for children. I'm like, fine, not a terrible policy, but that doesn't change the shape of the economy. That doesn't make any things any fairer. All that is just sure start part 2, because we've forgotten about the fact that there needs to be a reshaping of how the exchequer collects revenue, because we cannot afford to just continuously rely on our only source of government revenue being from taxation, because we just cannot afford the level of public spending that we have based upon just doing a little bit more taxation. What we need is a change of the way in which we do fiscal policy and the way in which we stratify our economy and how much the government intervenes and how much the government owns of our economic system, right? That's what really needs to change. But they can't see that. Again, that's just seen it's economically outside of the neoliberal consensus. Therefore, it must be too radical to be put into policy. And that's what this John Rentoul article was essentially saying, because it involved some borrowing and it was outside of the permitted UK journalism sphere economic precepts. It had to be discarded as being so radical that it was nonsensical. Despite the fact it was fully costed, despite the fact that it had been given huge amounts of support from reputable economists rather than the absolute nonsensical people from the IEA, the fund, or the advised on Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng's economic policy, like essentially special interest groups who just want to make rich people richer because that's who pays their salaries at the end of the day. That's what think tanks exist to do. Just regular economists who say that these plans of Jeremy Corbyn's clearly are fiscally responsible, they will work, and we will actually see better utilitarian outcomes for the population in general by putting them into practice. So that is, again, it's just the same old media groupthink for the private school educated UK journalism sphere. And then I saw, where's the fucking tweet? I'm gonna have to find this tweet now. I think I've bookmarked it. Essentially, the other one was saying that, look, by looking at Liz Truss tanking in the polls because of doing incredibly unpopular economic policy. This is somehow similar to Jimbly Crumbles, the Jam Man, because the only people who believe in it are a bunch of cranks on the fringes of the party who somehow believe that they have the solutions to everything, despite the fact that there is no popular support for these things. Which is just fundamentally not the case with regards to the Corbyn platform. They had huge amount. They had 40% of public support, right? They got 40% of the vote in 2017 on explicitly that platform of government intervention and the move towards social democracy, right? There was clear public support for it, and the fact you look at polling on individual issues, things like nationalisation are all supported by huge amounts of the public as well. So the idea that this was somehow something that only fringe Labour Party people believed in, rather than a mainstream opinion when you actually poll members of the public, is just there's no reality to be born from this, but they believe that that's the reality, because again, it goes outside of the permitted Overton window of acceptable ideas as far as the British media class are concerned. Let me fucking find. Of course, this fucking person worked for the Times. Yeah, like Flying Rodent, excellent account on Twitter. Was talking about it. Let me bring up the tweet in question. Right? Truss and Corbyn are two sides of the same coin. Everyone can see that the project is doomed, they're heading for electoral annihilation and damaging the party brand. Everyone but the true believers who think the public are wrong and it will eventually be proven right. But no, we have actual evidence showing that Jeremy Corbyn stuff is good because we have economic support from people within the mainstream of economics, right? It's a shift in policy, but it is at least something that will work and won't just destroy the economy in the same way Liz Truss does, based upon the advice of a very small cadre of incredibly, neoliberal or libertarian think tanks when you look at Policy Exchange and the IEA. Hannah Al Wrongman, yeah, 100% very, very true. But again, it didn't lead to electoral annihilation. It didn't damage the party brand. It brought in 200,000 extra members to the Labour Party, people who'd never been involved in politics previously, because they shied away from the neoliberal consensus that people like this from the fucking Times journalists just believe is received wisdom. The actual point being made here is, of course, that the escalating media panic of the late 2010s was surely correct and just, and certainly wasn't precisely the thing which made this orange-brown disaster possible in the first place, because these people literally got what they fucking wanted. Like, the great echoing silence in this country is how exactly did it come to this, and a lot of people don't even want to hear it, let alone answer, because they're fucking complicit and they got what they wanted. It's absolutely nonsensical. And again, this is another tweet from someone else. This person's from the New Statesman. The Corbyn era felt a lot like this. A cadre of insiders who simply couldn't understand why the wonderful vision they had for Britain wasn't resonating. When it was resonating in the Jeremy Corbyn era, because they got 40% of the vote. And it actually is in line with the ideology and the economic principles of a bunch of people in the UK. But again, Jeremy Corbyn was not part of the groupthink of the UK media class, and so they eviscerated him for it. They absolutely, and people believe that shit just because the papers would tell them to believe it. This whole people's consent was entirely manufactured, around this shit. It's absolutely infuriating the ways in which that these things were nonsensically equivocated between. I absolutely am at my wit's end with the UK media class at this point.